Okay.
Okay. So welcome to the Google Hangout here. My name is Cameron and this is Lewis, and we are going to talk about the difference between enterprise class SSDs and client SSDs. SSDs are a very popular device now, and you're starting to see manufacturers like Kingston and others offering SSDs for different types of application use. We've got home users, we've got business users like us,
system integrators,
yeah. And now what we're seeing is a lot of interest in using SSDs in enterprise class servers. And we want to talk today about the differences between a client-based drive and a server class drive.
I would say too, Cameron, when we present, that's probably the biggest question we get now, right? I think most enterprise data centers are looking to incorporate flash, right, into their hardware, and I would say that's, I think, the biggest thing we get, which is the point of the hangout, right? Why? What's the difference? Why do I want one over the other? So yeah,
exactly. So before we go into the differences, I want to talk a little bit about how you connect an SSD to a server versus a notebook or desktop system.
Right.
It is very similar. We've got two different types of connections on servers.
Yep.
And I brought a couple of drives here to demonstrate. I'm not sure if we'll be able to see it.
Yeah.
But we've got a SATA drive over here and a SAS drive on the right here. And if you look at the connectors, they're very similar in design. And this was done intentionally so that you can plug serial ATA drives into a SAS connection.
Right.
Now you don't have this flexibility in the other direction. You can't plug a SATA drive, you can't plug a SAS drive into a SATA port.
Right.
But this was intentionally done to give the server user or the server builder some flexibility in the types of devices that they want to use inside the server. So one of the beauties of serial ATA and SAS is that they're interchangeable in SAS-based systems, and most of your mainstream servers today have SAS RAID controllers in them, so we can plug serial ATA devices into those systems.
Yeah, we talked about this a couple of years ago, right, when we were first starting this, and you told me, part of the original SAS spec, they were kind of fighting fiber channel, right? That was it was an alternative to fiber, right? And one of those was to really come up with a very robust spec. The idea to incorporate SATA, right? So it just wasn't SAS only.
Yeah, it was really the inception of nearline storage into the data center, where we started seeing more and more ATA devices being used inside servers, really and specifically for disk-to-disk backup. So when the next serial technology interface for connecting hard drives to computers was being developed, it was thought to be a good idea that we make these two interchangeable in the same systems.
Okay, great. And while we're talking, I think we're going to be on for about another 15-20 minutes. You can ask us questions, right? So you've got a question for us. You can kind of see there within your Google Plus screen. You should be able to go ahead and enter that. We'll get to them as we can. If we can't get to them during this session, we will definitely answer them via email and make sure that we get you an answer to that. So good. I guess, Cameron, why don't we start off with just the main difference between kind of client and enterprise drives, right? Specifically SSD, right?
Yeah, exactly. So typically with a server class SSD, we have two primary components that are different than a client-based SSD.
Yeah.
One is typically a server SSD offers higher endurance because the workload on a server is very different than a typical notebook and desktop application.
Right.
What you and I do on a computer every day.
Oh yeah.
And the next element is the addition of a power fail circuit to offer an added level of data security or data protection, I should say, to the drive in the event of sudden power loss to the server.
Right. I would add there's a couple of things too that we just don't take our typical kind of PCB, right? That printed circuit board, slap high endurance NAND on there in a different controller. I mean, there's different things we're doing on the engineering side, things like inrush current. We're actually engineering this drive to be more robust. The beauty actually of our designs though is that we do inrush current now actually on our client drives also. So as we get into the difference between enterprise client, what to be aware of, we're doing some things on our client level SSDs that make it kind of enterprise-ish essentially. So But yeah, I agree. The endurance and PFAL are the two biggest things. What about PFAL in general? I mean, it seems like we get customers that it's like a 50-50 thing, right?
I think it really depends on the environment. In a lot of cases, there's environments where power isn't controlled as
Right.
well as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you've got redundant power supplies and UPSs in place, they're still susceptible to sudden power loss, and it's out of the user's control, so to speak.
Right.
So we tend to see these types of customers, opting for the power fail circuit.
Right.
Where on the other hand, we've got customers that are, very power safe,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't really feel they need the extra protection from the power circuit, so they opt to go without it.
Yeah, it does come at a cost, obviously,
Yep.
right? Yeah, there is an additional cost. So if you're looking at our E-Series SSD with the same type of 3K NAND, for example, we're talking about the E50, right? The difference between like our KC300, which is kind of our corporate drive, right?
Yep.
And our E50 would be the addition of that PFAL circuit, but it's not free, essentially, right? You do have to pay for that. And I guess even when we're talking about the PFAL circuit, what we have on there is a series of tandem capacitors that are on the PCB that are holding a charge, right? Think of it almost as a backup battery, right? So if you do lose power, right, what our drive is able to do is disconnect from input power and fail over to the caps to allow data that's in flight to harden to NAND, right, to allow the drive to shut down properly. So it is a big deal, essentially.
Yeah. So one of the other aspects of selecting the right SSD for your server environment is really trying to understand what your workload is.
Yeah.
Again, going back to the client model, we're very familiar with the Windows operating system.
Yes. Yeah.
We know what typical and power users write per day to the SSD.
Mm-hmm.
But once we enter the server space, it's less clear as to what the right workload is to the drive.
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
One of the best things we'd like to leave you with here today is trying to understand what your right workload is when you go to select an SSD for your server application.
Right. Yeah, it is important. I mean, we hear customers talk about things like IOPS, right? I'm going to be doing mostly read, mostly write. Some are advanced enough where they can tell us, I need this many IOPS, out of the storage array, right? Whether it's SSD or hard disk, which is great. I think most of the time, though, when we're talking about performance, we're talking about latency, right? At the end of the day, it's how long we're waiting for something to get done, right? We can talk IOPS, and our drive is capable of 80,000 IOPS or 60,000 IOPS. I mean, the various numbers. But really, at the end of the day, whether it's a backup job, whether it's a job that's, you're doing an SAP, you've got a bunch of servers virtualized, right? How long are you waiting for something to get done? And that's really, I think, when we talk about performance, it's really more about latency. But yeah, knowing your workload is key. I mean, it really is, and we know that's not always so easy. And at that point, we can help you out, right? I mean,
yeah. So we do talk to a lot of customers that they know their workload very well, and it's an easy selection for them.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other hand, we get a set of customers that really don't know what their workload is, and in those cases, we can actually provide them tools from within the drive through Smart. Smart's a technology that's been around on hard drives for years.
Mm-hmm.
Smart's there to monitor the health of the drive, but we as an SSD manufacturer, we can program our own attributes to read data out of the SSD, and one of those attributes that we program is the ability to be able to look at how much data is actually sent from the host and then written to the SSD.
Yeah, that's key.
So if you have no idea what your workload is, you can drop a set of Kingston drives into your environment for a given period of time, extract that data, and then make some life modeling predictions in terms of how long that drive's going to last in your particular application.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think not only that, but you'll get the nature of that data, right? Whether that data is very compressible or not. One of the features of our drives is the ability to compress redundant data, right? You save NAND life when you do that. You increase performance. And so, like Cameron said, right, being able to run your drives maybe just for a month, we can come back, give us that data, we can give you an idea, first of all, how much data you actually wrote, how much data you think you're writing versus what you wrote, and then we can kind of clue you in on the nature of that data and help you make a good selection. I mean, we have two drives basically, right, in that enterprise class, the E100 and the E50. The main difference between the two is that the E100 is using 30K PE cycle NAND. So when we're talking about how much data you can write, we're talking petabytes, really, right? When we're talking about our E50, we're using 3K NAND, 3,000 endurance cycle NAND, and then we're talking about performance, endurance in the terabytes, right? So if you're going to write petabytes of data, right, over a given amount of time, definitely need to consider the higher endurance product. But I think what Cameron is trying to get at is via the interpretation of those smart attributes, we can help offer the right product, right? It may not be the E100 in all cases, and actually with most of our customers now, the hosting guys, right? I mean, who else are we selling SSDs to?
Database applications, right. Even boot drives and servers.
Right. It's mostly been what? The E50. It's mostly been the 3K endurance product.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. In most cases, most of our server users are able to get away with, like Lewis said, the 3,000 PD cycle NAND flash devices. It's really in the extreme cases where you're doing, just heavy writes where you need to move to a 30,000 PE cycle device like the E100.
Right.
But most applications, I think, from our experience, will work just fine with an E50 type of device.
I agree. And when it comes to performance, we talked a little bit about that. If you look at our two drives, the E100 and the E50, we do some different things on there. We offer more over provisioning on the E100, right? And so they are 28% OP'd, so our drives are 100, 200, 400. And on the E50, our drives are 100, 240, 480. Where that helps is actually performance and sustained performance, right? If I can reserve an amount of NAND, then that's what really over-provisioning is. We're taking some of the NAND on that SSD and not making it available to the user, right? And so in this case, if you look at our 480 gig drive or our 512 gig drive, we're OPing that down to 400. So you've got 100 gigs plus over-provisioned, right? And we're making that available to the controller to do its cleanup, to keep sustained performance high. So, along with that endurance, on determining what endurance you need, performance is another big key. And so if you need our fastest SSD, right, the most sustained performance, the E100 with more over provisioning would be the one to go with.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So to kind of summarize, I think, if you're looking at integrating SSDs into a server, really trying to understand what your workload is, what your write workload is going to be, will really be able to help you determine which SSD to select, and whether or not you need the PFAIL circuit. It's really up to the user at the end of the day on the PFAIL call. Again, we see about half of our customers require it, and about the other half don't. It just depends on their overall environment.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. How about, I guess the next thing we wanted to talk about is kind of picking your SSD, right? So when we talk about, we talk about client, right, versus enterprise. I mean, what can you share from, our conversations with customers?
Yeah, so we have, there's a range of mentality out there when our customers are looking to integrate SSDs into their servers.
Yeah.
Some of our customers view SSDs as almost a disposable device, right? They want more of a client-based SSD to integrate into their servers. And if they understand their workload really well and they don't feel that they're going to burn those drives out early, then they can go that route. And then on the other hand, we have customers that do a lot of daily transactions. They know they're going to be writing, like you said, petabytes to the data over that useful lifespan. And typically that useful lifespan is 3 to 5 years. Then they opt for the higher endurance E100 type of drive.
I agree. That we want to answer. So how long before we see enterprise? Wow, 16 terabyte. I would say really what we're limited to at this point is kind of NAND geometry, right? So the biggest NAND die that we can build right now is 128 gigabit. That means basically that each die has got 16 gigs. I can do up to an 8 stack device, which is 128 gigs per device, right? I know it sounds like it's big, but it's actually very small. To be able to get to 8 and 16 terabytes is kind of tough right now. I don't think I've seen anything out with a controller that's able to support that. But I think, judging by what we hear and the controller companies we talk to and our partners like LSI, we're looking at, it would take something like multiple controllers essentially, And I would say to the user or the viewer that posed that question, man, it would probably be late 2015, I think, before we saw something in that capacity of being able to do 8 and 16 terabytes. But cool that you're asking, and it will be available. I think right now we're limited by kind of NAND and controller technology would be the two things.
Yeah, and I think to extend on that a little bit, you know, we are seeing requests in certain segments for higher capacity SSDs, and even some of our large data center customers that we're all familiar with. You know, they would love to go to NAND flash as opposed to staying with rotating media, but we're just not there yet, like Lewis said. But it's not impossible that we could get there in the future. So yeah, I think it's definitely something that's going to be coming. Larger capacity SSDs. I mean, if you look at the SSDs that we sell today, our high runners are in that 120 to 240 gigabyte range.
Yeah.
But again, we are getting more and more requests for some more of these niche type markets.
All right, we got another question here. So V360 gig is only for Windows. Is there a reliability difference between the 60 and the 120? Reliability, no. I mean, it really comes back to endurance, right? I mean, I think, you know, if we're talking the V300 specifically, that's really kind of our client consumer level drive. We would definitely not advocate that being used in any kind of data center application. If we're talking about the V300 specifically, though, no, really the difference is endurance at that point. You can write more data because you've got more NAND on there, right?
Right.
I mean, you know, which really, how about we talk about real quick TBW, right? And actually drive writes per day. So you want to expand on that?
Sure. So yeah. So to put some specs, so to speak, on how much data you can write to these drives, there have been standards put in place for how to measure endurance on SSDs, and we follow those standards here at Kingston.
Right.
And the specs that we put on our drives are TBW, which is total bytes written. This is the total amount of data you can write to the drive over its life, and drive writes per day, right? Maybe to kind of simplify TBW a little bit. How much data can I write to that drive, or how many times can I fill that drive with data per day, erase it, and fill it again? Right. So yeah, those specs are on all of the Kingston drives, and I think you'll even find throughout the industry that TBW and drive writes per day are a pretty standard spec now on SSDs. So when you're trying to assess your workload, just know that those specs are available. Yeah,
the one thing I would add is for our enterprise drives, that TBW is based on the JDEC enterprise workload. So there is a spec that we do. You know, essentially it's a workload that's applied to the drive. We measure that, and we're able to kind of, with that, extrapolate that out into how many bytes of data that we can write over the lifetime of the drive. And it is important. So we got another question. You want to go? Take that one?
Which is more economical, enterprise or client? Does low cost equal low performance? Not necessarily. So that's a really good question. A lot of times, if you look at the specs on our E100 and the E50, which is our enterprise line of SSDs, and our client line of SSDs, you'll see that the performance is very similar in terms of bandwidth performance and IOPS performance.
Right.
You know, SATA 6 gigabit, which is what all of our drives are based on.
Right.
You know, you basically have about 550 megabytes a second read and write performance out of that port, and we're pretty much fully saturating that port.
We are
with that. So whether it's a client drive or an enterprise class drive, your bandwidth performance and even your IOPS performance is pretty much the same. It really ties more to the endurance of the drive and that P-fail circuit that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, again, if we're talking just pure economical or lower price, the non-P-fail drives, our KC300, would be, you know, kind of lower cost per gigabyte than our typical E50, right? If we're comparing apples to apples there.
Yeah, but definitely, you know, a lower cost device does not necessarily always mean lower performance.
No, not at all. I mean, again, OP, more endurance, all of those things. But yeah, I mean, I think if you want more endurance, if you have an application where you're going to be writing petabytes, then at that point, yeah, then the E100 does make more sense. You know, that 30K NAND that we put on there comes at a higher cost, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. For this Hangout archive, it's going to be posted to our Google Plus page. We thank you guys for joining us. And right when we're done, I think it'll be converted into a YouTube video, from what I understand. And so you'll kind of view this whole thing. So if you got in a little late, you want to see it from the beginning, please remember our YouTube channel is youtube.com/Kingston. And please remember any questions that you have, whether it's, I know we had a very small time to talk about this, things regarding SAS 12, PCIe, bring them all, and we'll answer them as best as we can, as quickly as we can. Okay?
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, guys.